Hallwach's and Lenard's observations. In an experiment, Lenard observed photoelectric emission. When UV radiation was incident on the cathode C emitter plate, the microammeter showed a deflection. As soon as it was switched off, the microammeter did not show any deflection, which meant that the current had stopped. What had actually happened was that negatively charged particles on the metal surface of C acquired energy from the incident radiation, left the plate and attracted by the anode A due to the electric field. Hence, he was able to conclude the light following on the metal surface was responsible for conduction of current in the circuit. Before studying about Hallwach's observations, let us very briefly understand what an electroscope is. It is a device used to detect charge on a body. It has a vertical metal rod placed inside some box-like structure. This rod has two thin gold foil leaves at its bottom end. When any charged body, a positively charged rod, for example, is brought in contact with the upper end of the rod, the charge flows down to the leaves. Since both the leaves will now carry like charges, they will repel each other. In 1888, Hallwachs conducted another interesting experiment by connecting a zinc plate, which is negatively charged, by rubbing with fur to an electroscope. He illuminated the zinc plate with a low-frequency light, that is, light of red color. This did not produce any noticeable result. He then illuminated the plate with ultraviolet light, which is of a higher frequency, and observed that the leaves fell and the electroscope got discharged. This suggested that some negatively charged particles had left the plate. Moreover, if a positively charged zinc plate was brought in contact with the electroscope and illuminated by ultraviolet light, the leaves deviated further. This meant that the ultraviolet light caused some negatively charged particles to leave the zinc plate, enhancing its positive charge. These negatively charged particles were later on called electrons. In their experiments, Hallwach and Lenard observed that electrons were not emitted when the frequency of incident light was less than a certain magnitude. This frequency, known as threshold frequency, depends on the nature of the material of the emitter plate. It is observed that metals like zinc, magnesium, cadmium, and other emit electrons only when exposed to ultraviolet light. On the other end, alkali metals like sodium, lithium, potassium, rubidium, and cesium do so even when exposed to visible light. It is only after the discovery of electrons that these particles came to be known as photoelectrons and the process photoelectric effect. Experimental study of photoelectric effect. Photoelectric effect can be experimentally studied by setting up the same arrangement used by Lenard as shown in the figure. It consists of an evacuated glass or quartz tube. A and C are metal plates. C is made of a photosensitive material. A battery supplies negative potential to emitter plate C and positive potential to collector plate A so that emitted electrons can travel from C to A. Polarities of C and A can be reversed using a commutator. Photocurrent produced can be measured by using a microammeter, μA. Intensity of light can be altered by changing the distance of the light source from the emitter. Frequency can be changed by using color filters in the path of incident light. Collector potential can be changed by varying the potential difference. We shall be studying the variation of photocurrent with intensity of radiation, frequency of incident radiation, potential difference between A and C, and nature of material of C. Intensity of light on photocurrent. When the intensity of incident light is increased by bringing the light source closer to the metal plate, it is observed that the photocurrent also increases. That is, the photoelectric current is directly proportional to the intensity of light. Therefore, if a graph of photocurrent versus the intensity of light is plotted, we get a linear relationship. Note that frequency of light or the color of the light and accelerating potential between the emitter and collector plates constant, photocurrent too increases linearly. Effective potential on photoelectric current. When the positive potential applied to the collector plate A is gradually increased, the microammeter reading steadily increases. However, this happens up to a certain level. Thereafter, the current stops increasing further. It stays constant even when the potential is increased. This maximum photocurrent is known as saturation current. Saturation current is the current flow when all the electrons emitted at the emitter are collected at the collector plate. On the other hand, when a negative potential is applied to the collector plate, A increases, photocurrent decreases drastically until reaching zero at a certain negative potential. This critical negative or retarding potential at which the photoelectric current stops is known as stopping or cutoff potential. The graph illustrates the relationship between collector potential and the photocurrent. If the stopping potential is V0 and it stops even those photoelectrons with maximum kinetic energy, Kmax, then Kmax equals V0. If we repeat the above experiment by increasing the intensity of light, I3 greater than I2 greater than I1, without changing the frequency, saturation current increases accordingly. But the stopping potential remains the same as shown in the graph. This proves that stopping potential does not depend on the frequency of incident light. Stopping potential. If we repeat the experiment by keeping the intensity constant and change the frequency V3 greater than V2 greater than V1, we can see that the saturation current remains the same, and the stopping potential changes as shown in the graph. Stopping potential increases with frequency of incident light. It is because the energy of emitted electrons depends on the frequency of incident light. In other words, greater is the frequency of incident light, greater is the maximum kinetic energy of emitted photoelectrons. This implies that it requires larger retarding potential to stop the photoelectrons completely. If we plot a graph of cutoff potential V0 versus frequency V of incident light for different metals, we can easily find that V0 varies with V linearly for each metal. There is a minimum frequency V0 for which the stopping potential V0 is 0. This minimum frequency V0 is known as threshold frequency. It differs from metal to metal. This implies that the maximum kinetic energy of photoelectrons depends on the frequency of incident light, but not the intensity, and if the frequency of incident light is less than cutoff frequency, there is no photoelectric emission, even if the intensity may be large. From the above observations, it is clear that different materials respond to light in different ways, and that the same material responds to incident light of different frequencies differently. For an example, copper responds to ultraviolet light, but not green or red light in the visible spectrum. Metals like zinc, cadmium, and magnesium respond only to ultraviolet light, whereas alkali metals such as lithium, sodium, potassium, cesium, and rubidium respond even to visible light. How much time does a photosensitive material take to respond to incident light? If the frequency of incident light is larger than the material's threshold frequency, photoelectric emission begins in a very short duration of time of the order of 10 raised to -9 seconds or less. Electric emission is instantaneous.